if you're working with a child that's never had a childhood, it's almost like, how do I teach you what you've never had a chance to experience?
Mm-hmm.
And I am trying to, as an adult, now put inside of you what it looks like to be a kid. And you're like, well, you're old, so how do you know what play looks like, you know? But the idea is not so much I'm going to stop you from playing like an adult, but more so I'm going to help you understand and accept that it is okay to not be the adult.
Hi guys, welcome to another episode of the Legacy Speaks podcast. My name is Sierra Hillsman and I'm a licensed professional counselor and founder of Legacy Speaks, where we talk about all things mental health. You know, the podcast is all about becoming a bridge between clinicians and the marketplace. And you already know what time it is. Today we are featuring the amazing Lisa Ibekwe, and she is the CEO of The Comfy Place. And I am super excited to have this conversation because she's a fellow trauma therapist, and y'all already know I love having conversations with fellow clinicians. So Lisa, please let the people know who you are and a little bit more about yourself as a person and as a CEO of The Comfy Place.
Well, hi everybody. Thank you for listening, tuning in today. I'll try not to get on your nerves too much within the time that we're going to spend together. But I am Lisa Ibekwe. I'm a licensed clinical social worker out of Georgia. And just to throw it out there, I'm actually licensed in a number of other states too. So if you happen to be in any of these states, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, Florida, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, New Hampshire, hit a girl up because I love kids, I love what I do, and it's all about healing. So a little bit about me, I like to tell people that as a social worker, I'm in the trenches with you, but I ain't gonna do the work for you. So there's gonna be parts of times where I have to challenge you to kind of get to the nitty gritty, work on what it is that brought you into therapy. But our goal is for you to enjoy and have fun while you're in that healing process. And then I am, of course, like she said, the CEO of The Comfy Place. We have a lot of dope therapists, including me. But I'm also the resident child and adolescent therapist, pretty much meaning that I work with kids, teens, young adults. And I do work with grown-ups, but I usually have to give them my warning that I can be a lot. So don't say you weren't warned before you sit in my chair. But everyone seems to enjoy it. So that's the biggest part behind it. So thank you for having me.
No problem. Thank you for being here. It's been a while since I was able to talk to a child play therapist. And so, or just like a child trauma therapist in general. So I look forward to this conversation because I feel like there are a couple of parents that are probably tuning in right now and they're like, "Ooh, I need some clarity on what I'm experiencing with my child." And so thank you for that. And y'all give it up for her freaking energy, because obviously this is why she's so amazing with the kids. Okay. Because when you work with kids, you can't be somber. Okay. You gotta be a little live. Exactly.
So true. I meet some of my kids at the door turned like this, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, she's a lot." And I'm like, "But you know this though." But no, but I in particular, I end up being real hype when it comes to therapy and trauma, because a lot of times people think coming into therapy is just lay down on the chair and tell me how you feel, like the old white man version of it. And it's like, no, you can have fun, you can laugh, you can cry, and still get everything that you need out of that experience. So, at The Comfy Place, we're real big on that. Our motto is let's have fun, get real, and heal. We gonna keep it 100. We gonna laugh, but we also gonna make sure you get that healing.
I greatly appreciate that specific approach, especially when we're talking about dismantling or decolonizing the way that we approach therapy, especially as women of color. Oftentimes when people think about therapy, like you mentioned, they think about laying on the couch, speaking to this old white person, and you really have the opportunity to bring culture into the mix. And you are first generation Nigerian-American. And so let's talk about that. How do you bring your ethnicity, your culture, your background into the therapeutic space?
So one, I will say most Africans, we don't do mental health. We're already dealing with the mental health stigma in the Black community. And yes, there's been a lot of trailblazing and work done in that space. But for non-Westernized cultures, it's still very biased. There's still a ton of stigma, whether you're Hispanic, you're African, you're Asian, Indian, like there's still a lot of stigma around seeking help. And, one of the things we find is that people automatically assume you're crazy or something's wrong with you. But even the littlest things, like you're just worried about what's going on in your daily life. And it helps to talk to people. I know for me, being Nigerian-American, that shit was rough. I mean, I love my people. I love my family. I love my culture. But it gave me such a different lens on what life is like. So I actually find myself using a lot of the same teachings and approaches in therapy. One of the biggest things that I tell my kids, in particular, because kids are more impulsive than adults, although there are some impulsive adults out there, but kids tend to act before they think. So one of the things I always emphasize to them is when you get into the outside world, they don't care what your diagnosis is because they don't see that first. They see you, and let you not be a person of color, a little black boy, a little black girl, or a little brown baby, and be acting a fool. Because they're going to judge you based on everything else before they sit down and look at your record that most times non-people of color have written about you. So I find myself when I get into those spaces hitting them with the real, like this is what the world is going to judge you based on. And it doesn't take away the hurt that you've experienced. It's not going to change the fact that you still need healing. But when we're looking at how to help you get better, I'm going to explain to you what you're going to face and then help you build the tools to deal with that. So being a Nigerian-American, learning how to embrace the culture that my parents instilled in me, where a lot of restrictions were placed, but then also learning how to speak up and advocate for myself in a respectful way. Mm-hmm. And I find myself pulling that into the therapy room a lot of times when I'm working with my kids is how do you speak up to express your needs, but then still do it respectfully so that folks hear you and you get what you need, but you don't end up, getting popped at the same time because you're doing it. So it has a lot to play in how I approach therapy and just some of the, the personality that I use. But at the end of the day, it's still all about healing, whether it's from, the Nigerian experience, it's from just being a child of immigrants, whether, culturally a Black person in America, it's really just all about healing and helping people thrive.
Yes, I love that because you're taking the opportunity to kind of put it all on the plate, right? And when I think about like from a dietary perspective, I use a lot of analogies, so excuse me, my listeners already know what's up. But when I think about all the things that a client may be dealing with, is kind of like building a nutritious and delicious plate where you have like your peas and then your yams and then your proteins and things of that nature. And so you're literally setting the plate before them and letting them know like, yes, we can work on these things. We can work through your feelings, your thoughts, and your emotions, but we're also going to include these social cultural aspects. We're also going to include or touch on these beliefs that you were raised with. So I really appreciate how you're looking at the whole child rather than these certain aspects. I work with a lot of adults and maybe even young adults, maybe some teens, like the youngest I do is like 17. But what I found with a lot of parents is like, we're still working through that thought process of like, children should be seen and not heard. And like they're parenting in the same way that they've been parented. And so the fact that you are taking the time to encourage children to cultivate these self-advocacy skills in a manner that is respectful, but also respectful towards their parents and their caregivers, but also respecting themselves as independent human beings, I feel like that's very liberating within itself.
It is. And I was going to say, and I want to throw this out to the listeners because I'm big on analogies too. So I want the listeners to take your analogy of having food on the plate. But imagine you don't have a plate. You still got the same food. You don't have a plate. You got it on a napkin. And now you're passing this down to a child and they dropping everything because you gave them the food, but you didn't actually give them stuff to put it on. And then you're mad at them because they don't seem to understand why you mad that they just wasted food. You didn't give them the tools to begin with. So I love that analogy that you threw out there. And when I work with parents, I help them understand when we are passing down things to our kids, when we're holding them accountable for stuff, we also have to make sure that they have the tools to be successful in things. So if you always ate off a napkin and got in trouble, how the hell you expect your child to know how to do any different?
Listen, you know what? Don't make me get in here pulling out case conceptualizations, okay? All right. In my mind, I'm like, oh, this client, I want to Ooh, I want to consult with you on, but we'll save that for after the episode. But anyways,
after hours.
After hours. So this is why I love conversations with clinicians, because I don't necessarily have to explain the clinical aspects. Like, we already know what we're talking about. So I think that's like really, really dope. So anyway, let me get back to it. This year has been a whirlwind, hasn't it? And I'm pretty sure that you and your business have had to make a number of changes as a result of the pandemic. But I need you to get really present right now. Let's tap into the here and now in this very moment. When was the last time you truly checked in on your team? As a matter of fact, when was the last time that you truly thought about how you and your team are mentally and emotionally navigating through all of the adjustments that are taking place? But guess what? I'm here to help with that. Hi, my name is Sierra Hilsman, and I'm a licensed professional counselor and certified clinical trauma professional. I work with small businesses and corporations by helping their teams explore their presenting concerns. That way we can increase employee engagement and improve productivity overall. This can be done through in-person or online lunch and learn events, corporate workshops, and organizational seminars. Click the link below. That way you can start to learn how to truly invest in the overall mental and emotional wellness of your team. So, so there are a couple things that you're trained in that a number of people may not know. One being play therapy. And so can you tell the people what play therapy consists of, and how does it practically apply? How can it be practically applied to the therapeutic experience, especially when working with children?
So, and to throw out there, I am play therapy trained, but not yet certified, because there is a difference between someone who is fully certified, they've gone through processes, licensing, that kind of stuff, and then people who maybe have just done additional trainings to learn techniques and interventions to use. So play therapy in a therapy space looks perhaps like, let's say you have a child who's experienced the parents fighting all the time. The parents are always arguing, getting into fights. Maybe the parents are in the process of wanting to get a divorce. When the kid comes into the therapy room, as they're playing, we might see them acting out some of the things that they see at home. So that might mean that they're playing with, action figures, and the play is very aggressive. It's fighting each other. Or they may be playing in the sand tray box, and they have, mom and dad, or dad on one side of the sand tray box and then mom on the other. Really, play is the language of children. That's one of the things they teach in that space, that play is the language of children, because kids do not have the same brain capabilities, the cognitive abilities that adults have. That part of their brain is not fully developed yet. So you can't sit and ask them to, well, tell me how you feel, and let's talk about how we can process that and help you get better. They don't understand that. They just want to, break a few things in there and get their anger out, or, get that emotion out. And the sad part with kids is sometimes they don't even know what the name of the emotion is. So with play therapy, it gives us a chance to communicate in a language that children already understand, which is play. And then as the therapist, we incorporate different interventions and different techniques that maybe help the child to heal through the art of play. So I might have a kid who is playing aggressively with toys. I'm documenting and collecting data on how aggressive the play is. And as we are working together on identifying the emotions that they're feeling as they are playing, we are now starting to target, well, whenever you feel this way, what's something different that you can use? What's a coping skill you can use? What are some, interventions, as in deep breath, some relaxation? Do you even notice when you start to get angry? Mm-hmm. And as we teach them these pieces, it actually helps them start to understand, oh, I guess I was feeling mad at that time when mommy and daddy were yelling. And whenever I feel mad, it makes me want to hit and punch things. And that's why I hit my siblings. So now, instead of being upset because I have no control over mommy and daddy, and hopefully they in therapy too, working on their stuff, but the kids learn I may have no control over mommy and daddy, but I do have control over the ability to not hit my siblings. I may still feel mad, but I also have the choice to use a coping skill to regulate myself back down. So I'm big on, when I work with kids, teaching them that they have control. Because a lot of times kids don't feel like they do. They're just stuck in an environment where they require people to help them with feeding, with clothing, doing all these things. They don't feel like they have control. And when we see them lashing out, oftentimes it's because they don't feel like they have the power to express what they need to. Mm-hmm. But as you teach them that they can actually choose what happens, whether that's good consequences or bad, you start to see that they're like, okay, I do have control of the situation. If I hit my siblings, I'm choosing to get time out. I'm choosing to go on punishment. But if I choose to use my coping skills and calm down, I'm choosing to not get in trouble, and then I can still keep my playtime later.
Yes.
So play therapy incorporates all of that in a fun way, and it actually can be used with adults too, because we have some adults that have experienced trauma at an early age, and based on what research shows, the age at which you experience your trauma is the age that you stop developing.
Yeah.
So here you are, a 25-year-old adult, same scenario. You grew up watching mom and dad argue nonstop, and now you over here trying to have healthy relationships, but can't figure out why you can't keep a man or can't keep a woman, why you're commitment phobic, and you tend to agitate easily. Bringing in play therapy might look like you creating a sand tray of what you experience in the home. It could look like you playing with Play-Doh while you talk about the stuff that you've been through, and your brain starts to make those connections. So there's it's applicable to everyone. It's always tailored to the person that's in front of you.
Definitely. And that's one thing that I always encourage individuals who are looking to start therapy or maybe even strengthen their therapeutic journey. Obviously, there are clinicians who specialize in certain things, but our goal as clinicians is to meet you where you're at. And so recognize that there are certain interventions that can be tailored to that individual. That kind of goes back to that self-advocacy piece. I do want to tap back into a word that you use that really sticks out to me is choice, because choice is so powerful. And the way that you're leveraging it within the therapeutic space, it's as if you are empowering the child to be able to utilize their power of choice. And I really do live by the concept of choice theory, where we understand that we are making choices every second, every minute, every hour, every day. The idea of making the choice between staying in bed and hitting the snooze button versus getting up to go brush your teeth and wash your face is still a choice. Or the concept of am I going to log into my virtual session, or am I just going to completely ghost on my therapist? That's a choice. And so encouraging children to gain a better understanding that they are individual human beings with the power of choice. And it really taps into that concept of Erikson's stages of development, cultivating that autonomy, reminding them that even though they may be dependent at this stage on their caregiver or maybe even a teacher or some adult in capacity, they have the opportunity to cultivate independence in their decision making across the board. So thank you for that. Yeah. Yeah. So even with that, when we're talking about the concept of trauma, I find it important for individuals or even children to find ways of expressing their trauma. Like you mentioned, they may not have the actual language, but at least they have these tools to be able to convey what they're experiencing. The interesting thing about play is, especially with children of color, I often find that with them growing up as the parentified child, that concept of play is often not readily available to them. They don't really have the opportunity to grow up as having that childlike experience. And so for the parentified child, how do you reintroduce the concept of play or cultivating a childhood in the absence of being able to be a child, if that makes sense?
It does, but the interesting thing is play usually mimics what a child is experiencing. Mm-hmm. So the irony is a parentified child will actually be parentified in their play as well. Mm-hmm. They oftentimes will take on the role of mom or dad or the leader in the situation, because that's the experiences that they're having. And the way that it's targeted in play would be that if we're wanting to change this behavior because maybe it's become maladaptive meaning it's become a negative behavior that has been developed to deal with something else. And we develop behaviors to deal with things and to cope with things. But when we start to use those behaviors to replace in a negative way, like a child who's now controlling at school and they're getting in trouble because they're not listening. They're controlling at home, or they're being the parentified child at home is one thing, but now that you've applied it to this setting where it's not appropriate, it's now become maladaptive because they're getting in trouble for it. So when you're doing play, that theme usually shows up anyway, where they're, the mom to the baby doll, or, they're the dad telling everyone to do this and yelling at everybody else. When you're working with the kids, you want to start to undo that, unpack it. Because if you're working with a child that's never had a childhood, it's almost how do I teach you what you've never had a chance to experience? Mm-hmm. And I am trying to, as an adult, now put inside of you what it looks like to be a kid. And you're like, well, you're old, so how do you know what play looks like, you know? But the idea is not so much I'm going to stop you from playing like an adult, but more so I'm going to help you understand and accept that it is okay to not be the adult. Because one of the hard things that I think, and a lot of child therapists, this is one of our frustrations. It usually don't be the kid, it be the parents. It's nothing worse than doing some amazing work with the kid in session. Then they take their little behinds home and, little Tommy punching walls again because mama and daddy got to arguing again. Yes. When you've already told mom and dad, get out of the house if you really feel like y'all need to go at it. So little Tommy doesn't see that. Because again, control. We cannot control the situation that the children face outside of the home. So a parentified child, we can work with them on understanding that this is a behavior that you develop to cope with your situation. Maybe mom has to work. She's a single mom and you're having to step up to take care of your siblings. And that's understandable. But do you know that it is okay to still want to be a child? Mm-hmm. Do you know what it looks like to not have to worry about and care about other children? Yeah. And just be able to be present and enjoy what is supposed to be a childhood for you. Yeah. And then when working with the parents, teaching them out of necessity, especially with families of color. And it's a hard reality because we know systems, although designed by people, systems are not designed well. You as a parent have to find an alternative. Because if you don't, the very trauma that you experience, and oftentimes it's cyclical, that's where the whole intergenerational piece comes from, you are going to be putting your child through the same thing that you went through. And when they get older, that cycle will repeat. So it's situations like that, especially with children, it's always a twofold process. You have the work that you're doing with the child when you're teaching them new skills. You're helping them remove the belief that they have to do something in order to be important or to have value. You're helping them reset that belief. But then with the parents, you're also teaching them how to understand their child better, how to speak child. Because once you get older and life happens, you ain't thinking like a toddler no more. You're not like, oh, I want to play with Lego. It's more like I got this bill to pay. Mm-hmm. COVID won't go away. And then I got this kid won't shut up trying to talk to me while I'm in the Zoom meeting. You're not thinking about like what a child needs to develop. But to be honest, a child does need play as part of their development because that's how they explore. That's how a lot of some of the connections and stuff in the brain starts to happen. They need to go through those processes. And when they're denied that, that's when you start to see the brain forming in the way it's not supposed to, making the connections that are not supposed to be there.
Yeah, I absolutely love the fact that you help to widen the scope, reminding the child that it's okay to want to live your life as a child or to affirm that childlike experience, because you're right. Sometimes what I often hear with some of the kids that I come across, it's more of like, well, mommy needs me, or I have to take care of my siblings because who's going to take care of them? Like, or, well, I know if I do this one particular task, this will make dad happy, things of that nature. And it's a huge struggle because it's just like, who taught you that? Who put that burden on you? But it's actually the environment. So thank you for also creating space to provide psychoeducation for the parent, because to be 100%, the reason why I do not work with children is because of the parents. It's because of the parents, and it's a huge struggle. And so reminding parents to do their own work as they are trying to be able to provide these resources. Like, yes, thank you so much for affirming your child's experience, letting them know like, hey, my child has anger issues or they're not paying attention in school, things of that nature. Yes, thank you for recognizing that in your child, but do a little bit of like self-healing and self-awareness for yourself to be able to start modeling what healing actually looks like.
Very true. The irony is I tell like pretty much everyone I work with when I have kids involved, I'm like, that child didn't come out the womb like that. Mm-hmm. If you think about it, there's only a few like diagnoses and developmental things that a child is born with. Mm-hmm. And no child come out the womb mad, fist up, like trying to fight folks. No child really comes out the womb ADHD, like not able to focus. A lot of times these things and these titles that we're giving children stem from what they're experiencing, how the brain is developing based on what they're experiencing. And it's really important that parents understand that. We get that systems may feel like they don't work and you're in a setting that you have no control over, maybe because of need or just life circumstances. But if your child did not come out with a developmental disability or some other type of physical thing there, this is stuff that they are gaining as they are growing. And that's one of the reasons why we know therapy works, because with the right support, with the right intervention, we can actually start to undo some of the damage that's been done. We can help the brain form new pathways that say, go this way versus going this way that's going to lead to a bad decision. And I think parents also need to feel empowered in terms of you do have control over what you expose your child to.
Yes.
Because if you made them, you should be able to take care of whatever they need. That's how I say it. I know I've said this to one person before. I was like, it's not your child's responsibility to take care of another child you made. They didn't make that baby. Mm-hmm. You did. And despite what circumstances may be, they are still a child.
Yes.
So it is not their responsibility to lose their childhood because of a decision that you made.
Yes, definitely. I know right now we're talking a lot about the childhood aspect, but let's bump it up to adolescence, right? Healing looks different across the lifespan. And so how have you been able to utilize concepts like EMDR or any other specialties to tap into the healing process for our Black adolescents, our adolescents of color?
Yes. So I'll start it off by saying this. I'm intensively trauma trained for a reason. There was a time when I just did traditional talk therapy and I was like, oh, okay, yes, everything works. Talk about how you feel, talk about what you think and what it makes you do. And then I learned more. I learned that the body holds on to things too, not just the brain. So when you get into therapy, you're just talking about what happened. You're only processing your healing from a certain part of your brain. But the reality is every experience that we have touches on all of our senses. Yeah. Sight, sound, smell, everything gets absorbed into our system when we have these experiences. So a lot of these things I've learned, like with the EMDR, with the brain spotting, with IFS, all of these different pieces speak to what's happening in the body too. Mm-hmm. And I tell people when I work with them on healing, I'm like, if you only heal up here and you don't heal nothing else, you're not really healed. Yeah. So our goal is to get maximum healing so that every part of your system is cleaned out. An analogy I use is like, you tell your kids to clean up and they throw all that shit in the closet, or they throw stuff under the rug and you're like, but I can still see it though. So you didn't really clean up, but they think they did. That's pretty much what happens with our trauma. That's what happens in life. We shove a whole bunch of stuff out of the way. Oh, we don't see it anymore, so we're fine. But the truth is, it's still there. Yeah. It's still in our system. So with teens, it's a little different. It's actually really the same, but they just have a little bit more cognitive ability in terms of being able to speak. Most times teens still don't have the words the same way some adults don't have the words. And they need that same education on this is what feelings are. This is what, is happening in your body when you get upset. And with teens, I explain a little bit more about that connection between what triggered something in your body that now made you think something and then you reacted. So it's honestly almost the same CBT cycle, yes. But we're now tapping into the whole flow of, okay, well, this chick says something to me out of pocket. Now I'm mad and I had to punch her in her face. Pause. Why did it trigger me though? Yeah. And with the methods that I've learned with like the, EMDR and brain spotting and IFS, I love those methods. And the reason for that is because it forces the person to go deeper. So whereas most times we are thinking about what I'm going to say and making it all make sense, when we're using methods like that, we're going to bypass a whole bunch of stuff that we have control over, and even some that we don't have control over, to go to the deepest, darkest corners of our brain and of our body to pull some stuff out. And because of our brain's file cabinet, it's the stuff at the very back that oftentimes is pushing us to do what we're doing. Yeah. You have a teen that's promiscuous. You have a teen that's like depressed and now flunking out of school. You have a teen that's, juvenile in the juvenile system, especially our Black boys. I love my Black babies, but our males get locked up at such higher rates. Mm-hmm. They get suspended from schools at such higher rates. Their behaviors ain't no different than, you know, the little Tommies and little Billies,
Right.
but they get the consequences. And the sad part about it is that the system is so designed now to work against them,
Right.
that when you're trying to pull out all the stuff at the back of that file cabinet, you see a lot of self-blame. You see a lot of taking ownership and responsibility for stuff that wasn't even theirs. You see a lot of self-esteem issues, even if they don't call it that, but self-esteem issues from constantly being told they were not good enough, that they didn't matter, that they were the problem. And then now we see the behavior as a result of these beliefs.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, we'll lock them up, or okay, they're the problem. They're only doing what they know. Everything that's happening in here is coming out physically. So we can't blame them for doing what they know.
Yeah.
So in the therapy room, I educate them that every experience you have, good and bad, is registered in your body.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you download something on a computer. After a while, you have no more space.
Yeah.
Certain things take up more space than others. If it takes up a lot of space and it's negative, you have to process that in order to make room for the good stuff, for the healthy stuff.
Definitely. I greatly appreciate that approach, because like it always reminds me of the various techniques that we can utilize, as simple as like the body scanning, right? So taking that pause moment to be able to see how your emotions show up in the body. I also utilize like a paper silhouette, and I give like clients a crayon, multiple crayons, like the color red. Red is for like love, or maybe even yellow is for like happiness, or green is for like envy, or whatever emotion it is that they want to label that particular crayon. And I'm like, where does this emotion show up in the body? How intense is it in that particular moment? How long does it typically last? So bringing that awareness to where those emotions are showing up in the body, so that they can literally take the time out to be like, okay, what coping skills can I employ in this very moment to help mitigate that? And the other thing, when it comes to trauma, it's important for us to like build that mind-body connection so that we can familiarize ourselves with what's going on in the body. Because oftentimes, especially if a client has like a history of sexual trauma, or maybe even like emotional trauma, or anything like that, physical trauma, anything like that, we find ourselves trying to get outside of our body, or maybe even remove ourselves from that uncomfortable emotion. And so leaning ourselves into avoidance or denial or any other maladaptive coping mechanism as a way to run away from it, rather than allowing ourselves to fully experience it. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, no, and I was gonna say with the because the way that you explain that is great. And I think the way that some of the methods target it even further is like, for example, with EMDR, when you've done an amazing scan like this and you've been able to identify where they feel this piece, you rate the intensity to which they feel it. How big is that emotion? How big is that feeling, that sensation? And then like with EMDR specifically, you work to desensitize it. So just imagine, you know, you go to work and you got this one fella or this one girl that you just can't stand. And every time you go to work, you know, they're going to irritate you even more. And you just feel that anxiety increasing as you start to prepare to go to work. So one of the things that we do with EMDR is we work on desensitizing that. So anytime you get prepped for work, you hear this person's name, you interact with them, it's almost like you feel nothing. Yeah. And it's not a state of numbness. It's more a state of, we have desensitized it and reduced it enough that it no longer carries any weight. So you can still be in the same environment, but then not be as intensely impacted as you were before. And with our kids, who oftentimes are impulsive and they act first, think later, it's super important that you work with them on these things, especially now, because a lot of kids they don't have the same capacity to talk about what's happening in the world the way that we do as adults. So they're absorbing in all this content, but do not have the same mechanisms to process it.
Right.
And then people wonder why we have depression increasing, why we have suicide amongst kids, you know, even just thinking about suicide increasing. You know, like even amongst kids of color, where we didn't used to see it as much, it's increasing even more. But we have all these things that if we figure out ways to help the kids not only talk about it and learn new skills, but internally start to clean it out, then we are going to have healthier children.
Yeah. Even when you were saying that, I was thinking about how like having a colonic of some sort, like getting people to stop stop being so constipated, emotionally constipated, because you're right. Like kids are processing all this information, especially this particular generation where they were born with all this information at their fingertips, right?
Yes. The TikTokers and Snapchatters and come in with their own diagnosis and it'd be like, stop watching TikTok. You're banned for watching TikTok. You do not have narcissistic whatever disorder. You do not have this, that, and the third. But it is true. Exposure is so increased now that it's actually unhealthy.
Right.
Like the brain is constantly overloaded. Nobody is meant to take in that much information. Even computers, everything has its cap.
Exactly.
And I don't think people are noticing that as they just continue to filter in and pour into, let's do social media and let's put this out here in the news. With the amount that gets put out, if you're not paying attention and your child is hearing the news in the background, that is still being received in their system.
Definitely.
So they cannot see the pictures.
So finding ways to decongest and like take that stuff out, it's kind of like reorganizing our thought processes from like the place of like the Eisenhower matrix. And I know I'm talking about this from like an adult perspective in relation to kids, because no kid's gonna know what the hell an Eisenhower matrix is, but prioritizing the information in a manner where we recognize like, okay, like the order of importance, and anything that's not important, we can delete it and get rid of it. That way we can create space for it. Because even with that analogy that you utilize with taking all of your trash and stuff like that and pushing it off into the closet or underneath the bed, I was just like, it's kind of like when we ride around with stuff in our trunk, to the point where I'm
gonna clean my car one day. One day never comes.
Until the day that you actually need your trunk. And it's just like, I really need to sit down and go through all of this stuff and see what's relevant, how these pieces are interconnected, how they influence the way that I see the world, and how they influence the way that I see myself. Like, it's so important to comb through that stuff. That way everybody can get a better understanding of who they actually are. And that's why I really appreciate trauma work. The other thing too is just the way that you explain things. It makes things so natural and comfortable. That's why I'm like, girl, we could talk all day long. I really do. And so speaking to the concept of like natural and comfortable, how did you grow into the comfy place? Like, what was the vision behind that? Let's talk a little bit about the therapeutic services and all that you do when it comes to the comfy place.
Yeah, the irony is I was doing something one day where I had to make a video on my why, and I actually had to sit and I was like, I know that I love what I do, and I love kids. I love working with them, and I think I love working with them because I ain't got none yet. You know, it's switch up when you got something that you got to snatch up yourself. No, but I genuinely love working with them. I love seeing them grow and heal. But when I thought about, why do I do this work that I do? And what stuck out for me was those light bulb moments. Like when you have a kid that starts with you and they're just mad at the world and life has just dealt them the shittiest hand possible. And then you see them come in and they learn about trauma and they learn that what they've been through is not a reflection of who they will become. And they just walk out empowered, like it hits real different. Now, granted, I got some grown-ups that go through the same process, and that's amazing for them too. But my mindset is we all gonna die one day, and our kids are actually gonna be who's left. So the reality is we have to have the same way they talk about reinforcing the workforce so that we got people always there. We have to do that with our kids because they are going to continue our legacies, even if we don't think that we have one.
Yeah.
And for me, every time I sit with a child, I'm about how do I empower them? How do I help them find their voice? How do I help them understand the systems that are designed against us, but that they can still navigate, use a little style and work their way through, but that you can still get through it. And I love seeing them grow and understanding themselves, loving themselves. And the irony is through the work that I do with kids, a lot of times the parents actually experience it too. Because I've seen, some parents come in and they're like, I love them, but I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to because they work in the last nerve that I got left, and that nerve is on key.
Yes, sir.
And then you see the kids start to transform, and then you start to hear the parents speaking differently. And the parent starts to recognize, wait, I probably got some stuff too I need to sort out. Mm-hmm. The healing becomes collective.
Yes.
Because we started with one it. And it's not fixing the child because the child was never broken to begin with. It's about healing the child to strengthen and reinforce the foundation that will be left for the next generation to come.
Oh.
So I'm like, you about to have me preaching on something. But
no, I'm just like, oh my gosh, because as women of color, especially of the African diaspora, like healing is so communal, it's so collective. And I say this all the time, that healing is revolutionary. It's important for us to realize that as a people, when one person heals, when we heal the I, we begin to heal the we. And I don't think a lot of people really understand the gravity of that, especially within the family system. When one or two people begin to work on themselves, it helps to change the status quo of that family system. And that's why it's so important for us to not think that healing is only reserved for adults. Healing happens across the lifespan, and everybody has access to it. So thank you so much for reiterating that. I greatly appreciate the work that you do, because you help make my job a little easier, okay? And when I do
when they get to you as grown-ups.
Okay, listen, unhealed children become unhealed adults.
Very, very true. Very, very true. So when you were saying that, I did think of one analogy I had where, picture a tree. All trees start off from a seed. So our children are like a seed. And as they grow into the trees, that trees eventually shed their leaves, and those are seeds that get flourished into the ground and grow. If you have a seed that is not healthy and it starts to grow and it populates other seeds that spread out into the world, we are continuing to spread pollution. But if we grow this seed and we keep it healthy and fertile and take care of it, and now it spreads more seeds, these are healthier seeds that continue to grow and build beautiful masterpieces that are the children that, we pass on. So I use that because I'm like, I want parents to understand every child you have is a seed that you're planting into the world. And you're going to determine if that's going to be a healthy seed or if it's not, because the child did not create themselves.
Yes. And then let's take the analogy even further. Okay. The environments that you're growing these seeds in. Okay. You got to have healthy soil, got to make sure that you have the water, providing that extra sunlight. So
it's a lot of pieces that go into it, but I let people know it's not impossible, because even the rarest of gems have grown, in some rough places. But if you have the relationship, if you have the community, like you were talking about, if you build those networks, even in the environments that you're in, you can still produce healthy fruit. Yeah. So I think folks need to know that it's not impossible. Like if you live in places that you don't have the best supports, that it's not the safest. Like growing up in the hood doesn't mean that you're not going to make it.
Right.
It just may mean that you have more challenges that you have to overcome. But if you're determined to, you can.
Yeah, definitely. So for any parent out there, because one thing that I often get when I'm doing intake, I'm like, what does social support look like? I don't have anybody. So claim time to sit down, widen the scope a little bit. It may not be your immediate family, but what people in the community, whether it be institutions of faith, people at the school, community organizations, widen up your scope to see what's in your radius. And the cool thing about what happened with COVID, as much destruction that it's caused, is giving us an opportunity to be able to connect, not outside of our local village. And so you have that opportunity to build community virtually as well, just like how I was able to connect with Lisa virtually. Okay.
Like we blue moon, we found each other, but it's true. It's expanded how folks get to meet, and community looks different now, but it's still community.
Yes, definitely. So Lisa, one question that I always ask my guests before we wrap things up, you already know the podcast is called the Legacy Speaks Podcast. What would you like your legacy to say about you?
Ooh, girl, I talk about the dash in sessions, but I guess I never thought about the dash. I guess I want my legacy to be that I tried, that I was genuine, like I was 100 in terms of how I approach things, but really I want my legacy to be that I did make a difference, that I actually helped people heal. Whether it was 1, whether it was 20, it's just people will know that Lisa really cared about what she did. She really loves the people that she encountered, and she showed up each and every time. Because I think that is something that if it's passed down and people continue to have that same embodiment, we'll always have somebody there for someone else.
Ugh, love it. So beautiful. All right, Lisa, please let the people know once again, how they can find you, how they can connect with you, and also please reiterate what state you're licensed in as well.
Okay. So again, everybody, I'm with the Comfy Place. We are a therapeutic space for all to heal. And our motto is let's have fun, get real, and heal. But we do individual, we do group, family, and you name it, we got you. And then states wise, I am physically in Georgia, and we have 3 offices in Georgia. So we are still in person despite COVID. But don't bring it into our office because we'll get put out. And then some of the other states that I serve in particular, where I'm telehealth only, are Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Utah, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, Florida, and Vermont and Maine.
Awesome sauce. Please make sure that you guys follow them on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
So Comfy Therapy. We are on Twitter and IG as So Comfy Therapy, and then on Facebook as The Comfy Place.
And then you can
we're going to annoyingly be in your face.
Definitely. And you can also tap in at their website, thecomfyplacellc.com. Lisa, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. And once again, y'all, my name is Sierra Hilsman, licensed professional counselor, founder of Legacy Speaks. Please make sure that you are liking, commenting, and subscribing to the podcast and the YouTube channel. Definitely stay connected via Legacy SPKS on everything. Until next time.